Listen, it's such a pleasure to be here, and we're so grateful to be able to spend a couple of minutes with you this morning. But before I start, though, allow me to say a couple of words of disclaimer, if I may. The technology that we're about to share with you on stage has not received regulatory clearance. So indeed, it is still an investigative use device only. But we thought it was important enough, though, for us to share the technology with you because we think it has a possibility of being a key enabling technology to fulfill the vision of digital health that we've all been discussing over the last couple of days now at this conference. Now, our journey started in 2009, and in the intervening time, through the support of organizations such as the NIH, as DARPA, other developmental and business partners, we've developed a biosensing platform that provides medical-grade information in a form factor that's as easy to use and seamless as the wearables that we're all used to today. And we want to demonstrate that to you today. So with that, can we cue the video? Understanding how are you every day, any moment, and understanding in a way that when you're faced with an opportunity to make a choice about your health, you could do it armed with the data and information that allow you to actually make that right choice. And for us, we believe we have the technology and have developed the technology to at least fulfill that vision or part of that vision. And to demonstrate that technology to you, I have a couple of colleagues on stage with me, Bill McMillan and Kit, and they have in their bodies some of our sensors under their skin in various parts of their body. Bill has one in his leg and one in his arm, and Kit actually has one in his arm. And throughout the next few minutes, they're going to be on stage doing activities and actions that will perturb or at least disturb the tissue oxygen level in the area where the sensor is. And the data that our sensors are reading will be displayed here on this stage. And trust me, I will make sure that we have a chance to actually discuss what the data means. So for example, Kit has a blood pressure cuff on her left arm. She's inflating that blood pressure cuff to cut off the blood supply to her lower arm, her sensors in her lower arm. And you can see that as the blood flow decreases, tissue oxygenation goes down. As the tissue oxygenation goes down, the sensor is picking that up. And as she releases that blood pressure cuff, which she's doing right now, blood flow restores to the lower arm, and the sensor ought to be able to pick that up right away as well. So over the next few minutes, they're going to keep doing that. Bill will be doing some actions with body positions and exercises to demonstrate to you how the sensor actually works. You could choose to pay attention to that chart if you wish. But listen, what I'm going to talk about is really exciting. Okay? So pay attention to me if you want on this side. And I promise you in the last few minutes, we'll go in and debrief fully the data so that you know exactly what you're seeing. So listen, our lives have been so much better over the last 15 years or so because the whole notion of on-demand data and accessible data that help us make decisions of our lives to live it more productively is no longer an aspiration, but actually one of an expectation. So things like, how do I go from point A to point B, and what route do I take to get there faster is a perfect example of that on-demand data that actually help us make those choices. And it's enrich our lives and benefit our lives in a way that touches multiple facets, almost all facets of what we do. We would postulate, though, it does so only for facets that are external to our lives, but there's one area in which valuable decision ought to be made, can be made, that has not benefited from the wealth of information, and that's one of our personal health. Now, we feel very, very fortunate to actually work in this industry. I think this industry is packed with some of the most innovative, creative, smart, hardworking thinkers, both individuals as well as companies. And yet, what has been gathered in terms of all of the tools that collect a bunch of information on the external side has been able to impact and at least suggest some healthy living behaviors. And we would suggest that there is room for improvement. And one of the key enablement and improvement is, instead of looking at the external factors, go through inside the body, and in the same form factor, in the same paradigm, but measure direct analytes, direct body chemistry that actually gives you the information that's a true indication of actually your health. We think when you do that, you could truly transform where we are today in terms of digital health to the vision of digital health that we all have, which is how our lives have been benefited through the digital revolution. going on. And for that technology to happen, we think three things need to occur. One, the data you actually gather needs to be one that is medical grade so that a physician or yourself will be empowered to make therapeutic type choices with that data. And the design principle for us in designing the sensor is that we need to actually measure then those biochemistries inside the body as opposed to being on the outside. The second criteria for the technology to actually work is to make absolutely certain that the experience for the user is incredibly seamless. And that's because adoption is predicated by that. And that seamless nature also means that whatever it is that our sensor is doing needs to fit into the workflow of how an individual is managing his or her health today. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that workflow means that most of us see a doctor only once a year. And so the sensor needs to work that covers the span of most of that time, if not all of that time, between doctors' visits. The sensor has to work really, really a long, long time. And then the third is that technology needs to be accessible. It's accessible because it's using form factors and tools that we're all comfortable with today. And it's also accessible because there's not a huge incremental burden of cost that's required, so that the cost needs to be low enough where anybody, almost anybody, could actually access it. And if you can actually do those three things, they go into our design criteria. If you could do those three things, then we think we really have a platform and have a chance to transform digital health and create the vision, or create the path to fulfill the vision. Now, these three criteria, quite frankly, as confident as I'm saying those, it's not new, right? I think it's actually something that a lot of people have been thinking about now for the past few decades. It's been the holy grail of continuous biochemistry sensing inside the body. But the barrier for that vision, if you will, to be fulfilled is actually based on a simple fact. That fact is that your body is really, really good, I mean exquisitely good, at determining what belongs inside your body and what doesn't belong inside your body. And it's funny for me as a biologist to be up here saying that that's a problem, right? Because quite frankly, as a human race, as a species, we celebrate that. If the body's not good at doing that, we'd all be dead and there wouldn't be a conference here. But for evolution, that's awesome. But quite frankly, for body sensing, for biochemistry sensing, it's a big, big problem. Because anything you put inside the body to try to sense, the body elicits what's called a foreign body response. So inflammation occurs, and scarification and scar tissue start building around it. So any one of us who's ever gotten a splinter understand what I'm talking about, right? You get a splinter inside the body, no matter how small it is, and inflammation happens, scar tissue gets around that sensor. And that's okay for the body to get rid of something, but it's really a death sentence for a sensor. Because the sensor no longer works because the local environment changes, it's quarantined away. And what that means is it's like asking a blind person to read Braille, but instead of reading Braille with their finger, reading Braille with the oven mitts on. It's just a really hard problem to overcome. And we at Profusa have believed that we have actually solved that problem. And the solution actually is here. It's a multi-component solution. So what's the sensor that's inside Kit and Bill's body, which she's reading right now, is this, what I'm holding in my hand. Now, I gave a talk one time, I said it's really, really small. I pulled this out, and the guy says, well, that's not that small. And I said, no, this is the vial. The sensor is actually inside floating around. It's about 500 microns in diameter, about 3 millimeters long. It's really, really small. It fits inside the interior diameter of a hypodermic needle. So the placement under the skin is no more invasive than a vaccine or getting a blood drawn. It's a little stick. And once this sensor goes inside the body, it's devoid of electronics. There are no electronic components in here. It's soft and pliable. It's tissue-like. And its microarchitecture encourages the body to grow healthy tissue throughout it. So we call it biointegration. It integrates and becomes part of the tissue. And on the sensor, then, it's decorated with a bunch of fluorescent chemistry that's specific to an analyte of interest that you want to measure. And then getting the signal out, then, is as simple as having a reader like this, where you could actually put on the surface of the skin. It fires, every time you want a data point, it fires a light to activate the fluorescent signal, and it's got a photodetector to catch a signal back. The result of this design is that you have a sensor literally that lasts months, if not years, in terms of longevity and functionality. And the frequency of data that you could actually gather is in seconds. So you could fire and gather data as frequently as once a second, which is what's happening now. And the data acquisition on this consumer form factor is completely seamless and non-invasive. So you gather the data in the background and nobody knows it. So what's the impact of this? The obvious impact in application is any disease state or any condition in which monitoring a key analyte or key biochemistry is really important. And for diseases such as respiratory disorders, metabolic disorders, if you can measure oxygen, if you can measure glucose and monitor in this way in the form factor that's like a wearable, you actually could impact about 1 in 6 people on the face of the planet alone. These are folks who are either developed or about to develop these metabolic or respiratory disorders. And beyond that, in the video, we hypothesized, or at least suggested, a few other use cases in which this technology might be important. The ability to actually get medical-grade information non-invasively and as easy as wearing a wearable today. For athletic performance, for in-home care, for post-surgical follow-up, or soldiers' health and remote monitoring of soldier health. But I would actually suggest that the platform like this, we're not smart enough to figure out exactly all of the application that could happen. Because if you believe what we're saying, and at the end of this demonstration you look at it and say, well, those sensors actually work pretty well, then what happens is the impact and the benefit actually cuts across the entire spectrum of stakeholders, from the individuals to the care providers, to financial payers, to the innovators. So we're happy and thrilled to actually be part of this ecosystem, to be able to provide a little bit of benefit to all of you to figure out really how it is that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So with that, Bill and Kit, 2 minutes to figure out exactly what the data is, and we'll be done. Yeah.
So this first set of data was on my leg, where I went down into a squat and held muscle to tetany. And you can see this is at the point where I began to do that, and we began to see an oxygen decrease. And then when I relaxed, there continued to be an oxygen decrease because blood was flowing back into that muscle. And then eventually I caught up with the metabolic deficit, and it started to come back up. If we switch over to the sensor on my arm, this was intended to demonstrate how blood perfusion into the arm can change the local concentration of the oxygen. Right here, I have Kevin adjust the scale a little bit. But all I did in this sensor was simply raise my arm, which caused the blood flow to vacate my arm, and then the oxygen value went low. When I lowered my arm below my heart, I increased the oxygen value to my heart and to my arm, and that increased the blood into the local area around the tissue. And I just repeated that through the cycle. I'll let Kit describe what she did with occlusion.
Sure, thanks, Bill. My demo is very simple. I have a sensor right underneath this reader right here near my elbow. I put a pressure cuff right about it and to reduce the blood flow temporarily by inflating it. So you can see that as soon as I do that, the O2 index goes down. I held it for a minute, and then I released the pressure. And you can see the blood flow is restored, and then you can see the oxygen index goes up right away. And I repeat it a few more times in the past few minutes. You may ask, what is the application for this? Why do we care? One of the applications could be in monitoring in diseases that is related to reduced blood flow. I met with patients with advanced peripheral artery disease that because of the poor circulation in the leg, they have wounds on the foot that won't heal because it's not getting enough oxygen. So you can imagine that physician could place a couple of these sensors around the area, and they can monitor the progress based on different therapies that are given. So back to you.
Thanks, and let me wrap up by just saying the sensors that Bill and Kit have that they're actually doing this demonstration on have been inside their bodies for more than a month, and we've had sensors that actually have worked as long as 2 years. And we're just thrilled to be here. Thanks, Joe, for the opportunity, and we're just humbled by the opportunity to actually do what we can to contribute to this ecosystem and really make digital health a reality for everyone. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you.